David after God's heart. We've been seeing David first and foremost as a picture of Jesus. But we need to recognize that there's the elements regarding David, that he was indeed a man after God's heart, after whom we can follow his example. That he was one who was pursuing God's heart, and as a result of being after God's heart, he was one who was shaped by God's heart. Let's take our attention and go to 2 Samuel. We're going to chapter 20. We're continuing to look at some Messianic foreshadowings that are taking place in this cluster of chapters and these accounts. It's not primarily or only, or exclusively, I should say, David that is foreshadowing aspects of Jesus and his ministry, particularly his passion. When we talk about his passion, what are we referring to? What does passion mean? The passion of Jesus.
You're really enthused about something.
Okay, passion does mean that, yes, but when we talk about the passion of Jesus, it's referring to, it's a different word that's being used there, a different meaning of the word. But you're right that that's what passion does mean, enthusiastic about something. It's crucifixion. So it comes from the King James in Acts chapter 1, where it speaks about the passion of Jesus, and it literally means the sufferings, the suffering of Jesus. So when you talk about the passion, there was several years ago, a movie came out, The Passion of the Christ. And it literally means the suffering of the Christ. So that's what that... Yeah, we're not going to even go there, just that we'd be aware. That's something that we can relate to as far as at least a title is concerned. So this cluster of chapters is using various elements of those that are involved or named, events that are taking place that speak about elements that will be transpiring during the passion, the suffering of Jesus during his ministry. All right, so we have here in chapter 20 a guy by the name of Sheba, and he is he's taken a hold of a number of people who, he's a Benjamite, and he decides that they don't want David to be king. They don't want to keep him or take him as king, and so he gathers a bunch of people, and they take off trying to mass a number to establish yet a different kingdom again. Now, let's pick this up, and let's do in verse 3, and we will go to, let's go down to verse. It's hard just to take this in small pieces in order to get an overview of what's taking place. We really need to go down to verse 13.
David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 concubines whom he had left to care for the house, and put them in a house under guard and provided for them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living as if in widowhood. Then the king said to Amasa, "Call the men of Judah together to me within 3 days, and be here yourself." So Amasa went to summon Judah, but he delayed beyond the set time that had been appointed him. And David said to Abishai, "Now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he get himself to fortified cities and escape from us." And there went out after him Joab's men and the Kerethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men. They went out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. When they were at the great stone that is in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was wearing a soldier's garment, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened on his thigh, and as he went forward it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, "Is it well with you, my brother?" And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not observe the sword that was in Joab's hand. So Joab struck him with it in the stomach and spilled his entrails to the ground without striking a second blow, and he died. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri, and one of Joab's young men took his stand by Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab, and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." And Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the highway, and anyone who came by, seeing him, stopped. And when the man saw that all the people stopped, he carried Amasa out of the highway into the field and threw a garment over him. When he was taken out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri.
The one thing about these events is that they're not always the most pleasant of details to go through. That said, it is here, and let's take it down a little bit by bit. Now, Joab, he was whom? Who is Joab in all that we've been seeing taking place?
David's general.
So he's David's general, and then also his nephew. All right. Now, Joab, he's a interesting character. He's a rascal, if you can say that. He's always looking out for himself. He's doing things his own way. Basically, the king says one thing, David says one thing, and then Joab goes about and says, "You know what? I'm just going to do this or that. I'm going to do whatever I please." Well, after the events took place with Absalom, David has determined that he's going to put Joab's cousin, Amasa, in charge of the army. So he's going to replace Joab as commander. Joab doesn't take too kindly to that, and Joab ends up putting Amasa to death. Now, let's look at some of these aspects that are occurring. See, when God gives us details of events that are going to be taking place, he doesn't just state it once, does he? We've seen the foreshadowings of Jesus over and over and over. And not just his coming, but particularly in this section that we've been in, has been showing his Jesus' death and resurrection from various points of view with different people and events representing those aspects, haven't we? Now, having a look at Amasa and Joab as they're detailed for us here. Joab has already gone out, and he's taken with him in verse 7, the Kerethites and the Pelethites. Those are names that in the Hebrew point towards or hint at that these were archers and slingers. Now, meaning that these are mighty men. These are men that are part of the fighting force. They're in pursuit of this man Sheba, who's trying to incite a rebellion. When Amasa finally catches up with Joab at Gibeon, Amasa comes to meet them. Now I want you to see if you can see elements of the gospel, the passion. Now when I speak the gospel, we think often just as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the gospels, right? From Jesus' birth to his resurrection and just leading up to his ascension. But when I talk about the gospel in this context, I'm talking specifically about the passion of Jesus. So from the night that he was betrayed until his death and resurrection. All right? So see if we can see elements being foreshadowed, hinted at here. Now, keeping in mind that we're not referring to David as the foreshadow of Jesus. Okay? Now, they come to this place in Gibeon. Amasa came out to meet them. Joab was wearing a soldier's garment, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened on his thigh. He does something with Amasa when he greets him. What does he do?
Grabs him, his beard with his right hand.
So, all right, so he comes to him, And remember, this is a Middle Eastern, even today, means of greeting. All right? So there's nothing else implied in this except for a greeting. And it's a greeting of friendship. All right, so he doesn't mean that he grabs his beard, all right? It's not like, get here! He's not bringing him close by the beard to kiss him. Now, a kiss would be on the cheek, all right? One side, then the other. And when he takes him by the beard, it just means that he takes his face, all right? Because his face is bearded, all right? So he could as easily been said if he was clean shaven, he would say take him by the face. Now, it doesn't mean that he's grabbing the face. All right? It means that he's taking his face and bringing him close to kiss him on the cheeks. What does that remind you of? Judas. All right, so Joab is foreshadowing two roles here. The first one is Judas, but Judas is an extension of what or whom? All right, so Satan. So let's bring it just to people. Let's limit it to people in this aspect. Pardon me?
I said, oh,
Okay, yeah.
The Pharisees.
More specifically.
The Sadducees.
All right. Okay.
The High Council.
The High Council. Who was paying Judas? Chief priest. All right, chief priest.
You was one of them.
Had to be one. Had to be one.
You were all around.
All around. So the chief priest. How do we get that Joab is also a picture of the priest? Any idea?
The retreat.
It's coming back to verse 8. What was Joab wearing?
Oh, it's military tunic.
Soldier's garment. All right, well, what's up with that? Nothing specifically when we see it as a soldier's garment. But when you see it in the Hebrew, it's much more blatant, right?
Yeah, that makes more sense, yes.
It's not a maid, but a made. Okay, a made. When we look at this word, let's go to Leviticus chapter 6 and verse 10.
The priest shall then put on his linen clothes with linen undergarments next to his body, and shall remove the ashes of the burnt offering that the fire has consumed, and on the altar, and place them beside the altar.
All right, so this is concerning the burnt offering. And the priest is to wear his made, his linen garment. Literally, it's the made. Then we see also in connection with this, there's a couple of other times that made, very rarely is the word made used in the scriptures. We see that David also wore a made. One of the messengers bringing news of the outcome of the battle when Eli died during that battle of Nadab and Abihu, where they ended up dying in that battle. The messenger came and he was wearing a made. Could have been that he was part of the priestly class. I don't know. I don't recall reading that. Nevertheless, let's go ahead. So very infrequently is this word used. A couple of times it's used of a warrior's garment. But the thing that we're focusing on here is its first use is in Leviticus chapter 6, where it's speaking about the priest's linen garment when he's carrying out what? Dealing with the burnt offering, the sacrifice. So this is a sacrifice. It's what he's wearing when he's dealing with the sacrifices. Okay, that's important for us to realize. Now, let's jump ahead to the book of Psalms, and we're coming to chapter 133. Let's read verses 1 and 2.
Behold how good and pleasant it is when the brothers dwell in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the collar of his robes.
And we can do number 3 because it's only 3 verses, but let's finish it off.
It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord has commanded the blessing of life forevermore.
So it's this unity is like the oil that runs down Aaron's beard and also down onto his made. Onto his made. So who is Aaron? So what would he be wearing? Linen garment.
Down on the collar of his body.
The collar, but collar literally can mean the mouth, the pay.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, you said running down on his made, just so they don't get the word made mixed up with collar.
Okay, yeah, so collar is pay, mouth, and the collar of his garments. So garment there is what is the made, okay? And mouth, we looked at that several lessons ago, where it can mean the collar, but it can also mean the hem, the skirt, the bottom of a skirt, which seems to be more likely what that word pay is referring to, especially in relation to the context of the next verse where it speaks about the dew of Hermon in the north of Israel down to the mountains of Zion, which is to the lower section of the land of Israel. All right, so there's this connection here where there's a picture of Joab. He's wearing this garment. Why do we need any detail about what he's wearing? Like, what's the purpose of that? Because Amasa's, we're not told what he's wearing. We're not told what Abishai is wearing. We're not told what David is wearing. Very rarely is it something where we're being told what somebody is wearing, unless it's important for us to realize, to be aware of the details that are being given to us, the picture that is being created for us.
High position.
I guess potentially, but we're looking at this. What is the reason the Holy Spirit includes this? And the word that is being used regarding it is one that's linked to the garment of the high priest. Now, if we go back, still in Psalms, going back to Psalm 109. This is a psalm of David, and I'd like for us to look, let's look at verse 18. And we're at Carolyn.
He wore cursing as his garment. It entered into his body like water, into his bones like oil.
And then it continues on, just giving more detail about sort of an alliteration or a poetic picture of what the garment was like that was put on. Now, this garment, any guesses what the word for garment is here? Very good. You guys catch on quick. All right. Now, with Joab being a picture of two persons, with Judas giving the kiss, but he's an extension of the activities, if you will, of the chief priest, of the high priest. Because it's the high priest who's commissioned Judas to go and carry this out. And what was the purpose? Was to arrest Jesus for the purpose of killing him. He wants to put him to death. Now, Amasa was appointed over whom? And he was the commander. Now, Amasa here is the picture of Messiah. He's the Messiah figure. And Amasa was appointed over the commander, over Joab. Jesus was appointed higher than even the chief priest, wasn't he? Jesus is appointed as the new high priest. He's the high priest now, not after the order of Aaron, because Aaron was the first high priest, and from him were all successive high priests, right? Like Zadok and Abiathar. They were both descendants. They were high priests during David's time, and they were descendants of Aaron. You could not be a high priest unless you were a descendant directly of Aaron. You couldn't be a priest unless you were a descendant of Levi. So only Levites could be priests, and only sons of Aaron could be the high priest. So Jesus came as our high priest, but not after the order of Aaron, because if that was the case, there would still be the carrying on of sacrifices and so on. Jesus came to replace or make a change in the priesthood, and we know from Psalm 110 that he's a priest after the order of? Right. So Melchizedek is the one that is foreshadowed back in Genesis chapter 14 for us, and whom God swore on oath, as it were, in Psalm 110, that you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And several times in Hebrews chapters 5, 6, and 7, the writer there speaks of, and Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, and Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, after the order of Melchizedek, and so on. So several times in just those 3 chapters, we see that Jesus is the new high priest, and he offered himself as a sacrifice. How often? Once for all. Now, what do we see here is that the Messiah figure, Amasa, is being given as greater than Joab, the commander. Joab doesn't like it, so he carries out this plot. He draws him close as a sign of friendship. Now, they were very close. As a matter of fact, Amasa and Joab, they are cousins. Did I already say that, or you just done your homework?
You already said that.
I already said that. Okay, I can't remember. Okay. Now, what happens? So he strikes him in the stomach, spilled his blood to the ground, and he didn't strike a second time. So think about this. When Jesus was on the cross, the Roman soldier struck Jesus once, didn't he?
Yes.
And blood and water flowed onto the ground. It's just mentioned here that he struck, and speaks of his entrails came out, but it speaks of that which was inside, the blood and so on came out. There's nothing spoken about any other damage that was inflicted, so indicating that there was no bones that were broken. It was just a thrust of the sword, and that was it. So again, yet another picture of Jesus, because none of his bones would be broken. And of course, that was according to the scriptures, where in Exodus chapter 12 and in Numbers, maybe 20, I'm guessing at that one, where the scriptures 2 or 3 times in the Torah tells us, so the first 5 books of Moses, tells us that you're to take the Passover lamb and none of its bones are to be broken. And then the psalmist speaks about it again, none of my bones are broken. And of course, Jesus, when he was on the cross, they thrust him with the spear, but what was the intention? What were they coming to Jesus to do? Not just to see if he was dead. They didn't come to see if he was dead, first of all. They did this, they thrust the spear to confirm what they had discovered, but what were they coming to him to do? To break his legs. For what reason?
Go ahead.
So he wouldn't be able to push up his diaphragm like it would finish him.
Yeah, so crucifixion was designed, and the Romans were masters of this, was to prolong the suffering of the punishment. So he was crucified earlier that day, and a victim on the cross could be kept alive for days, literally. They could suffer for days. But the chief priest said, we don't want him to defile the land, and Passover is about to come. Sundown is about to take place. So can we speed up the process? And of course, Pilate gave the order, go and break their legs, and that's what would end up taking place. They wouldn't be able to stand in order to gain more air. So they did that to either of the criminals on either side of Jesus, but when they came to him, they found that he was already dead. And it was at that point that the Roman soldier thrust his spear into Jesus' side, and out of that wound flowed blood and water. So we see the similarity taking place here. And then Joab continues on after Sheba, the son of Bichri. One of Joab's men stands beside Amasa's body. Did any of Jesus' believers hang around after that crucifixion? During that process? I guess I shouldn't say during the crucifixion, but leading up to that process. Where do we see John and Peter? So they're coming, they're viewing the proceedings. And at the crucifixion itself, who's at the foot of the cross? John is. And after, now there's many people coming by. So look what it says. Amasa was wallowing in his blood, and anyone who came by, seeing him, stopped. And when the men saw that all the people stopped, he carried Amasa out of the highway and into the field and threw a garment over him. But before that takes place, there's a lot of people going by, and it's just like, wow, how could this have happened? Because David gave the orders for Amasa to lead the army in place of Joab, and now here is Amasa dead. It seems like, what's going on here? And then this one takes the body of Amasa, takes him out of the highway. So Jesus was crucified where? On the highway. Literally, Golgotha was on a roadway. And he takes him out of the highway, and what does he do? He puts a garment over him. What do we read about Jesus when they took him from the cross? What did they do with him? They wrapped him in a garment. They wrapped him in cloths. And then they buried him.
Well, they laid him on the tomb.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Laid him down, they didn't bury him.
Well, yeah, that's what they referred to as, and they buried him. So that's taking a body and a corpse and entombing it or putting it into a grave that's in the ground. Either way, it's being referred to as burying. But we would look at burying, be more literally put in the ground and then have earth thrown over that grave and buried literally. But Jesus was crucified, dead, and buried. And on the third day, he rose from the dead. So buried in the loose sense of the word, that a body that after is dead and been processed, whether wrapping or embalming or whatever the process might be, then buried, might be entombment or buried in the ground, whatever the case might be. Now there's...
Interesting that Amasa means burden. The name itself means burden.
Means burden.
To carry a burden.
Mm-hmm. So did you catch that? Can you just say that louder just in case? I'm not sure if it caught online.
The name Amasa means burden, to carry a burden.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jesus, of course, at the cross, he carried our burdens, all of our burdens. And that's why Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 5 that we are to, 1 Peter chapter 5, to cast all of your, another word for cares, burdens, because he cares for you. Cast all your burdens, cast all your cares on him, because he cares for you. Jesus is our burden bearer. What's another way to look at that? What's another aspect of Scripture that tells us that he bore our burdens, that he comes and he takes our burdens? Right out of Jesus' own mouth. What did he say?
Weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest.
So another word for heavy laden is?
Burdened.
Heavy burdened. Come unto me, all you are heavy, weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. For, he says, for I am meek and lowly, gentle and humble is another. Lowly, what do we use that word today? Is that a word we often use, lowly?
Only in song.
In a song. Okay, lowly. And do we use the word meek so much?
No.
So what do the words Jesus said, I'm meek and lowly of heart? What does that mean? Literally means that he's gentle and humble. Yeah, both of them with strength, right? Gentle with strength, humble with strength. Meekness, a lot of people would regard meekness as weakness. But neither gentleness or meekness, which is the same synonyms, two words meaning the same thing, they don't mean weakness. They mean strength under control. Yeah. A good picture of that meekness in a few short weeks, we will have yet another granddaughter. And Lord willing, the border will be open. We'll be able to get across and go down sooner than later. Nevertheless, whenever that happens, when we get to hold that little bundle in our arms, you can be sure that I'm not going to be tossing her in the air. I'm not going to take her on the ground and start wrestling with her. Right?
Not yet.
I think Caitlin would be hard.
Not right now.
I will take her. Deb will take her. Deb will take her first, I presume. I might wrestle her. But when I take that baby in my arms, you can be sure that as strong as I am, some might say, well, I don't know, Pastor. You rile me enough, I can do some damage, right? Let's just say that. I may not be the strongest out there, but I can tell you this. You're going to have one massive fight if you try to do any harm to my granddaughter, my granddaughters, or my grandson. So my gentleness, my strength is going to be exhibited in the way that I gently hold and care for that baby. Does that give a bit of a picture of gentleness, of meekness? It's strength under control. I can do a lot of damage to a little child. I never would. But do you see that strength that is demonstrated in gentleness or meekness is all about protection and provision. Humility, being humble, is not making much of self, making much of God. Do you realize that even in 1 Peter chapter 5, where it says that cast all your burdens or your cares on him because he cares for you, then it says that we are to do what? Testing. What is it?
Humble yourself before the Lord, and in due time he will lift you up.
Humble yourself before the Lord, and in due time he will lift you up. So humbling is both. Both James and Peter speak the same thing. So James chapter 4 and 1 Peter chapter 5 both speak those aspects. All right. Now we're coming into, let's come into verse 14. Oh, interesting, one other thing. No, we're back in 2 Samuel. Sorry. Oh, okay. So in Psalm 109:18 about wrapping himself. Did I do that? All right. So Made, the garment of cursing, the garment of curse. That this one was wrapped in the garment of a curse, is part of David's psalm. It's with this idea of Made connected with this account. We see that Joab is wrapped with a garment, a Made, which speaks of the high priesthood. But then we see, in a sense, that Amasa is wrapped in a garment. But this is one, you look at Amasa and you would say this is one who is cursed, right? And so I'm not saying that Psalm 109:18 that David is saying that I'm talking about Amasa here. I'm just saying that that's the other place where we see the word Made, and it's connected in this story so that Jesus, he became a what for us? So that he might turn that curse into a what? Blessing for you and me. All right, let's pick it up in verse 14. Back in 2 Samuel chapter 20.
Just one verse.
Let's have a look at let's do 14, and then we're going to how about you start reading and I'll tell you where to skip to, all right? How does that sound? That might be easier.
Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel Beth-maachah, and through the entire region of the Berites, who gathered together and followed him.
We'll keep going, and then I'll tell you when yeah.
All the troops were with Joab, came and besieged Sheba in Abel Beth-maachah. They built a siege ramp up to the city, and it stood against the outer fortifications. While they were battering the wall to bring it down, a wise woman called from the city, "Listen, listen, tell Joab to come here so I can speak to him."
All right. Now let's go down to verse 19.
And find 19. We are the peaceful and faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why do you want to swallow up the Lord's inheritance?
And then he, let's just see there, he tells them that a man named Sheba has come to you, and he's trying to raise his hand against King David. Give him up alone, and I'll withdraw from the city. So, look at the last part of verse 21. The woman said to Joab, here's what's going to happen.
His head will be thrown to you from the wall.
Well, now on that note, all right. Sheba was a man who was raising up his hand against David, the king.
So they were going to cut his head off.
They did do that. Yes, they removed his head from his shoulders and then cast it over the wall. What's going on here is The name of this city, which is Bet Maakah, means house of depression. It can also mean the house of piercing, house that has been bruised. Now, Jesus, he was what for our transgressions? Bruised. And what was he for our iniquities? Pierced for our iniquities. And by his stripes we're healed. So this is what the name of this city means, the house of piercing, the house of depression or oppression. So formerly, because of sin, this main, a major city, or a mother, as this wise woman refers to the city, that the city is a mother in Israel, and with that, it's a representation of all of Israel, all of the people. And because of sin, oppression had come upon the people. But the dual meaning of this house, of this city, can mean house of piercing, house of being bruised. And because of what was pictured for us just before this, with Amasa being slaughtered and then covered with a garment and so on, and furthermore, what did David say? I want you to gather together to me within how many days? 3 days. So when we see the number 3, what is it pointing towards? That's back in verse 4 of chapter 20. Yeah, so it's Messianic, right? The number 3 is speaking towards Jesus. Now, Sheba, he's a rebel. He's a man who's trying to raise up this insurrection against the king. And what does Joab request? For his head. And this wise woman, she does what? She said, yeah, I'll do that. We see there's an aspect.
John.
Pardon me?
Is that symbolic of John Baptizer, except it happens after the fact?
There can be a picture of that we would see, of course, John the Baptizer in that as similarity of events. But what I'm looking at, there's some that I've come across in preparation for this. Some that said, well, this is yet another picture of Jesus. But I don't see Sheba as being a picture of Jesus, because he was a man of rebellion looking to overthrow the kingdom. So what I see here is this. When we look at, before I finish that thought, there was one aspect that I want us to see about peace. Verse 19, I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. So she says, I am one of those who are peaceable. She's referred to as what kind of a woman? Wise woman. So it's like a title here, a wise woman. Now, one who is peaceable. Now, I want you to think about peaceable, or what you shorten that idea. Peaceable just means one who is full of peace, and bring together peaceable and a head and the gospel together in one verse. What do we get?
John 3:16.
Okay, John 3.
Got to be the right answer.
John 3:16. Jesus is the answer. Okay, let's bring it back to Genesis chapter 3:15. My brain is not enough information for you to answer your question.
We're looking at
I know. So trying to figure out the best way to ask the question to draw out the answer. Let's go back to Genesis 3:15. What do we read there? What do we see about a head regarding the gospel? So the head of the serpent is going to be crushed by the heel of the one that the serpent bruised. And that bruising is a picture, of course, of piercing, isn't it? Now, we see Goliath in 1 Samuel chapter 17. What does David, the Messiah figure there, the foreshadowing, what does he do with Goliath? Goliath is a picture of sin, the enemy. And what does he do? What does David do to Goliath when he's down?
Cuts
Cuts
his
off
head
his
off.
head.
Takes a sword and removes his head. What do we see in Romans chapter 16 and verse 20? Anybody know that right off? And the God of peace will soon crush Satan underneath your feet. So what that is referring to is the full effects of the results of the crucifixion and resurrection is going to be seen. Now, we've already seen the overthrow of Satan at the cross, but all of the aspects of him being totally taken out of the way is not yet realized. It's not fully in place, is it? But it's coming. So these are further aspects or fulfillments of the gospel of peace. She said of herself, I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. The God of peace. She's one who's walking in peace. And what's she going to do with the head of this rebel? She's going to put an end to the rebellion.
Scary out of one.
That would what?
That would certainly scare you out of one, that's for sure.
And at the end of all of this, we find out that in verse 22, what does Joab do? They cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, threw it out to Joab, and he blew the trumpet. So trumpet being blown. Pardon me? Still in chapter 20. That was verse 22.
Chapter 20?
Yeah, still 20 and verse 22.
What, we're on Genesis? Or?
No, sorry.
Oh, we're going back.
Yeah, I need to be more specific. If I'm using just the chapter and verse, then I'm referring to our original text back here in 20. Sorry, in 2 Samuel. Otherwise, I'll be indicating the book and the actual location. Sorry about that. Bit of my shorthand taking place there. Let's move on into chapter 21. Let's start off, and we will look at verses 1 through 3.
There was a 3-year famine in the days of David, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord. The Lord replied, it is on account of Saul, his bloody house, for he put to death the Gideonites. So the king called the Gideonite. Now the Gideonites were not Israelis, but a remnant of the Amorites. Israelites had sworn to spare them. Saul, in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah, had sought to slay the Gideonites. So David said to Gideon, what shall I do for you? How can I make atonement that you Lord's inheritance?
All right. Yet another picture of the Messiah. So another vignette, another snapshot that's taking place here. And how many years has this famine gone on for?
3 years.
3 years. So a number 3. So again, we're seeing, when we see 3, it's a heads up. What's coming, what's in this context? What we're going to see spoken about in some way or another. Yeah, we're going to see an aspect of the gospel, of the cross. So how does that play out with the Gibeonites here? Well, first of all, who are the Gibeonites?
The survivors of the Amorites.
Survivors of the Amorites. It says that the reason for the famine was because of the blood guilt of Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death. That doesn't mean all the Gibeonites, obviously, but he put a number of the Gibeonites to death. Pardon me?
Joshua had made a treaty with the Gibeonites.
Joshua made a treaty with the Gibeonites. Let's get a bit of a timeline then, with that being the case. So we've got Joshua here, and this is at 1400 BC. And it's at this time in Joshua chapter 8. Do I have 8 correct? Chapter 9. That Joshua makes a treaty with the Gibeonites. They pretended that they lived far, far away, and they put on old clothes, they baked bread and then left it for several days so it become hard and crusty and even to the point of molding. So that when they make their way to Joshua and the camp of Israel, it would appear as though these are from a distant land, although they lived right next door. He said, we've heard the fame of your God, and we want to make a treaty with you. And so what does Joshua do? Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Sounds good to me. And then it was discovered after the fact that, so first of all, we need to see that Joshua did not inquire of the Lord and just went ahead and made this treaty. Then it was discovered shortly thereafter that they lived next door, and Joshua and the people, they were ready to go and put them to the sword. But Joshua said, we can't do it because we have made a treaty with them. We've made a covenant with them. So now we are, we're their protectors. We're obligated to them. But what we will do is we will make them, put them in service to us. They'll be woodcutters and water carriers. Keep that in mind. Woodcutters and water carriers. What will they be?
Woodcutters and water carriers.
Okay. So here we have the Gibeonites. And during the time of Saul, Saul had put a bunch of them to the sword. He had killed them. And because of that blood guilt, the Lord is bringing this famine upon the land. Remember, when you see a famine in Israel, what should be the first question you ask? Why? Why is there a famine in Israel? Why should we ask the question why about a famine in Israel? Because there shouldn't be famines in Israel. So why shouldn't there be? Disobedience. Because
if Saul made the mess, then why is David suffering and his day? Why not Saul's day?
why wasn't this in Saul's day, and why is it in David's day? Good question. What do you think?
Maybe God was giving Saul time to repent or something.
Okay.
He didn't suffer the consequences. David did.
Saul didn't suffer the consequences, but David did. We're going to answer that question in a second, okay? I intend to answer that question in a second. What was the last question?
Okay, let's do this first, and then I'll get back to that. You never got back.
Oh, yeah, regarding John the Baptist. I don't see it as John the Baptist, but that this is a picture of Jesus because of Amasa, the connection there, and then the head being thrown over is a picture of the cross, what Jesus did on the cross. He's a head crusher. So that was the answer to that.
Actually, he didn't.
So,
You said that, but you didn't, I thought you were coming back to John.
oh, so John, yeah, so.
You said you studied different things and.
Okay, so some had said, not regarding John. I hadn't seen anything regarding John on that. Okay, gotcha. All right. Tied that one off. When did Saul do this?
During his reign.
Okay.
Oh, was that what, he was
I don't
fighting
know.
on Mount Gibeon when he died. He was fighting the Gibeonites when he
was fighting
No,
the
he was fighting the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. So he was fighting on Mount Gilboa in the just south of the Sea of Galilee on the southeastern corner, if you will, of the Jezreel Valley was Mount Gilboa. So not far from the Jordan River, just below the Sea of Galilee. All right, so when did Saul do this? When did he carry out this atrocity?
We don't know because
Early in his reign.
it only says it here.
It only says it here.
Well, that's the only place I've ever seen it.
There's no record saying that this is what Saul went ahead and he did this. And then now we're being brought to that. But does it? Don't know.
Here.
All right, that's why we're here. Okay. Let's keep reading, and then we're going to go back to 1 Samuel, and we're going to go back to 1 Samuel, but first we're going to keep reading, and let me summarize a few things for us, all right? So David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do? How can I make atonement? All right, atonement. What's the word? Atonement. It's reconciliation, right? How do I make this right? How do I make atonement that you may bless the heritage of the Lord?" Who's the heritage of the Lord? Israelites are. So they said to him, "We don't want money. It's not a matter of money. Don't want anything from Saul or his house in that way. And it's not for us to say. We can't put anyone to death in Israel. Because what are the Gibeonites?
They're woodcutters and water carriers.
Woodcutters and water carriers. They're servants of Israel. So are they in any place to say, this is what you're going to do?
No.
So are the Gibeonites coming to David and saying, David, King David, live forever. Listen, this is what happened to us. Here's what we want. No. Why has David gone to the Gibeonites? So the Lord has given insight as to the reason for this famine. David asked the question, why is there famine? If there's famine in Israel, there's sin. There's rebellion. Something has been done contrary to the law of God. So it went on year after year for a period of 3 years. So David's like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. This is not, okay, remember, this is not just a matter of the course of weather cycles and so on. This is the judgment of God. This is the finger of God upon us. God, what's going on? Because of the blood guilt of Saul against the Gibeonites. So David goes to the Gibeonites. All right, so it's at the Lord's direction, and then David goes to seek out the matter. And verse 5 says, "The man who consumed us wanted to destroy us so that we should have no place in all the territory of Israel. Let 7 of his sons be given to us, so that we may hang them before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of the Lord." And the king said, "I will give them." Gibeah was what? That was the hometown of Saul. That's where his rule was. That's where his kingdom was headquartered, if you will. But the king spared Mephibosheth, who was Jonathan's son, right? Because that was a matter of covenant. Because of the oath the Lord had that was between them, between David and Jonathan. So, king takes 2 sons of Rizpah, that was one of Saul's concubines, and 5 sons of Merab, and who was the daughter of Saul, whom she bore to Adriel, the son of Barzillai, and then gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and then the Gibeonites went ahead and killed them. They hanged them on the mountain before the Lord. All 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the first day of the harvest, at the beginning of what harvest?
Barley.
Barley harvest. What should that bring to mind? Barley harvest. Boaz. But what about Boaz? What is it? Passover. Passover. You're right. You're right. That is Boaz. But that always brings us back to Passover. And Passover not only brings us back to Exodus chapter 12, but ultimately it brings us ahead to Jesus. All right. Let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 20. Is it just 20? 22. All right, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 22. Can someone summarize for me what happens there with Saul pursuing David? And David had been where? He'd been in Nob. And then what happens?
Saul kills the
So
priest.
David gets some food and so on from the priest at Nob. And then David leaves and Saul's pursuing, and then?
Then he kills the priest.
So Saul puts all of the priests at Nob to death. That's pretty wild. Now, let's come further and let's see. Let's look at verse 18 and go to verse 19. We're at John, are we?
18 and 19.
Yes, please.
And the king said to Doeg,
Doeg, the Edomite. Yep.
turn thou and fall upon the priest. And Doeg, a Edomite,
Edomite.
turned and he fell upon the priest, and slew on that day fourscore and 5 persons that did wear linen
Ephod. So how many is 85?
85.
85. Okay.
Nob, the city of the priest, smote, and he were the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses and sheep were the edge of the sword.
All right. So how many did he put to the sword? 85 priests. And plus the men, women, children.
So the Gibeonites.
Oxen, asses, sheep.
So who is numbered with them? Many of them are. Let's have a look at our screen, okay? Let's have a look at our map. So they even mentioned their animals. You have a look at Nob. Nob is the location of the tabernacle during the time of Saul, and then it ends up getting moved to later to Gibeon. So you see Gibeon is listed on this map. So have a look. Nob. Let's have a look first at Jerusalem. So here's Jerusalem. Just give us a right. All right. So Jerusalem vicinity, just to the northeast, is the city of Nob. So this is before Jerusalem was owned by Israel. David took Jerusalem and turned it into his capital. So he took possession of the city of Jerusalem. But prior to that, in 1 Samuel chapter 5, is it? That prior to that, Jerusalem was known as? So it was owned by the Jebusites, shortened that, and it was called the city of Jebus. Now, this is the city of Nob. How far away is Gibeon? Not very far away. It's only a few miles away. So it looks not longer because we've zoomed in on the map, right? So we're only about maybe 3 to 5 miles to Gibeon, somewhere in that neighborhood from Nob. Now, they were made to be, the Gibeonites were?
And water carriers.
Right, so woodcutters and water carriers. For what purpose?
The sacrifices.
Big part of it was for the sacrifices. The priests needed water for the washings, for the laver, and for the bathings, and so on. Cleaning the utensils. They needed wood for the sacrifices, for the burnt offerings, for the fire that would be taking place. Now, did all the Gibeonites live in Nob? No. Did many of them live in Nob? Yes. Now let's look at the next, just to get a little bit of a pull back just a little bit on that map. All right. So we have the picture here, Bethel. You see where the marker is? That's between Bethel and Ai. That's where Joshua chapter 9 takes place. Or chapter 8. They had fought against Bethel and Ai. They finally conquered, and then Gibeon. Notice how close Gibeon is to Bethel and Ai. There's Bethel and Ai. Here's Gibeon right here. So just on the center left-hand side of that map. So remember, they came at, you see it there? Yep. There you go. Okay, so there's Gibeon. Where's Nob? And then Jabus, right there. Okay? So Jabus, let's bring it on here for the online. Here's Jebus. Here's Nob, Gibeon. So Bethel and Ai was very close to Gibeon. And this is where the Gibeonites were living. They came to Joshua pretending that they were from a very far place. Well, with all that's going on, it would appear, we can't state conclusively, but it would appear that many of the Gibeonites were put to the sword at the killing in Nob in 1 Samuel 22. And look what we read here in chapter 22 there, that same chapter, in verse 20. One of the sons of Abimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped, fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, what does he say? I am responsible for the death of your whole family. So everybody that died today, he said, it's on me.
That's why God waited.
So it wasn't really David's.
So it wasn't really David's fault, but he's assuming the fault for it. He is assuming the guilt for it. Why does God wait until David's latter part of his reign to bring this judgment on the house of Saul when Saul isn't even around anymore? It's so that an aspect of the Messiah's ministry can be carried out and evidenced on behalf of the Gibeonites in the person of David. David assumed the guilt that was not his. It was Saul's.
Jesus assumed guilt.
So Jesus assumed the guilt that was not his, it was ours. So he died as us, and he died for us. You understand that? He died as though he was you and 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 me. He died as us, as much as he died for us. So he assumed our guilt, the righteous for the unrighteous. And then we see, what do we see that the Gibeonites did? They were given how many of these sons? 7 sons. And each of these sons were royalty, weren't they? They should have been, they were part of the royal line. So these 7 sons, royalty, they died for the guilt of their fathers, of those that went before them. 7 is a picture of, a number of completion or perfection. 7 is a number also, not only of completion and perfection, but 7 is a number of rest. Shabbat. On the 7th day, God rested. So, and they hung on trees. Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. Now, look what we see here in verse 10. So it's at the beginning of barley harvest. That's verse 9. It's the beginning of barley harvest. So again, we see a picture of Passover. So pointing back to slavery that was defeated, to death that was robbed at Passover, right? Because it should have been the firstborn of every household should have died. But that was stopped. It was robbed. And was the sheep guilty? No. And that sheep foreshadowed Jesus, the sinless, perfect, holy Lamb of God. And we see that the mother of 2 of these sons, Rizpah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock from the beginning of harvest until rain fell upon them from the heavens. Sackcloth, what is that picture? Mourning. Now, these are Benjamites, right? Does this not picture Rachel, who mourns for her children? Who was the one that died when she was in mourning? Or excuse me, she was in mourning and died at the birth of which son? Benjamin. And the scriptures tell us that in Jeremiah chapter 31, 15, that mourning is heard in, or Rachel weeps for her children. And that's quoted for us where? In Matthew chapter 2, when Herod put to death all of the babies under 2 years of age, because Jesus had been there. So we see those that had been put to death. And then fast forward, and we see this last picture that I want us to see. What is she doing? She didn't allow the what?
The birds to touch them.
Didn't allow the birds to come down or the beasts of the field by night. What does that harken back to? Who does something similar to that? Abraham, where?
God made the covenant with him.
God made a covenant with Abraham, or ratifies the covenant with him in Genesis chapter 15. He divides the carcasses. And then we're told that the Lord ratifies the covenant with Abraham. And Abraham then, he protects those sacrifice, if you will, the picture of the sacrifice, from all of the vultures, to keep them from consuming or from feeding upon these aspects or portions of the sacrifice. So that's Genesis 15, verses 7 through 16. It takes in the first part and even after that, but that's where it speaks of primarily. And then lastly, so we see that being foreshadowed for us, because Jesus came to fulfill covenant. All the promises of God find their yes and amen in Jesus. And it was she did this until when? Until the rains came. What did that signal? That was the end of the drought. The drought was over. The rains came. And what did Jesus say in John chapter 7, verses 37 through 39? On the last and greatest day of the feast, Jesus stood up and said, If anyone is
Oh,
thirsty, let them come to me, and there shall flow from them rivers of living water. What was the occasion that Jesus spoke this? Good guess. Feast of Tabernacles.
Fall.
It's in the fall feast.
When the rain starts.
It's when the rain starts. And at the Feast of Tabernacles, condensing it like super just thumbnail sketch, at the Feast of Tabernacles, when they would be celebrating it, all the people would be coming together and they would be taking their lulavs, their branches, their palm branches, and their etrogs, that's a citrus fruit. They would bring them together and they would start shaking them. And what does that sound like when you've got several tens of thousands of people doing this at once? Sounds like rain. And what are they praying for? Lord, send the rain. Send the rain. And Jesus, on the last and greatest day of that feast, he stands up and says, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me, and out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. And by this he was speaking of the Holy Spirit who had not yet been given. All of these messianic overtones and foreshadowings that we see in these, throughout the entire story of David, but even in these latter sections that normally it's just like, wow, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of war, a lot of fighting, and a lot of rebellion going on. What is this about? It's not just recounting history for us. It's showing for us over and over again aspects of pointing forward to an anticipation that the Messiah is coming. And with all of the repetitions, saying this is a sure thing, this is a sure thing, it's not that with each repetition it makes it more sure. It's with each repetition it makes us more aware of the sureness of something that had already been established before God even said, let there be light. Over and over again. And it's not done yet. We still see more. But not tonight. So, yes, next week, same time, same place, and we will pick it up from there. Amen.